Okay, so this particular video is going to be a review for the movie Midway. I went to go see this last week and I've been meaning to make a review about it for days, but I've just been so busy. Thanksgiving's coming up, I've got a lot of work, families come into town, we've gone to see other movies, and so I just haven't had a chance to sit down and talk about this. And before I went to go see this movie, I had checked the Rotten Tomatoes review tally, the score tally, and the critics basically trashed this movie. They did not like it at all. I think the last number that I saw among, let's say all the critics was in the 40 percentile range. Oh my goodness, all that noise up there. I don't remember if I checked the top critic score, but it was, I'm going to guess that it was probably even lower, maybe in the 30s. The audience score, however, was completely different. I believe it was all the way up in the 80s, like the mid 80s. So I had a feeling that I would most likely side with the audience. And I just want to say right off the bat that in general, I sort of did, but maybe not quite as high as in the mid 80s. It's not, in my opinion, it's not a bad movie, but it's also not a supremely outstanding one. And I had talked with someone the day before, I think it was the day before, well, shortly before I went to go see Midway, and I was talking about the disparity between the reviews of the official critics and the regular audience, which is just, regular folks like you and me. And he told me that he thought he understood why, and let me see if I can remember how he explained this. He said it was kind of like, it gave you the feeling of like a documentary with a little bit of character drama stuff acted out in between, or a little bit of interactions between the characters, and then they go off and the action would happen, and then there'd be a little bit more interaction with the characters, and then they go off and the action would happen. So it felt like you were watching a documentary, sort of, except I guess without narration. So as I'm watching this movie, I came to the conclusion that that's pretty much an accurate way to describe this film. The characters in here, well, there was a lot to put into this time frame that they were making the movie in. I'm sure there was probably quite a bit of material that they cut out, but the film itself focused. Okay, so a lot of times, let's say the movie Pearl Harbor, right? Another historical film, takes place around that same time. This movie actually starts off several months before, maybe a year and a half or so, maybe in the late 30s, before Pearl Harbor, and then very quickly jumps to, when Pearl Harbor happens. And of course, the movie carries you along the timeline from the Pearl Harbor attacks to when the Battle of Midway occurred, which I believe was in mid 42, June, I think. And it goes through several different things that happen. Like it goes over the there were these other things that happened, other military things that happened after Pearl Harbor, before Midway even occurred. And the film takes you along that journey. Like it shows this one right here, where they had sent some bombers out to bomb Japan, and then they ended up in China because they weren't going to have enough fuel to get back. They ended up in China. So, that particular portion of history was also shown in Pearl Harbor. If you remember, that part was like toward the end, and I believe that was when Josh Hartnett's character got killed, was when they had to land in China. And he got killed, I think, by a Japanese soldier or something like that, if I remember. It's been a few years. So, and there were some other battles that happened. Shoot, I can't remember the name of the other ones. Doggone. Anyway, whatever. So, it was just very cut and dried, in my opinion. any focus that was on the characters, there were so many characters here, you guys. I mean, I'm showing all of these pictures of the different characters who were real life people. Don't believe there was any character that was fictional, because at the end of the movie they showed the character that had been portrayed in the movie, and they told you what happened to them. So there were so many characters, they really couldn't do a closely specific character drama about them all. So they sort of tried to maybe like give them all sort of a glancing blow type of focus with regard to their character and their personal drama and struggles and whatever. But there were some that they did this to a little bit more than others. So the ones that they focused on the most was the guy up here in the upper left, the one his face is featured more prominently, and that's because he was the character that this fellow right here, that they followed, and that's his wife, that they followed more prominently with regard to their personal lives. And this fellow here, they also followed him quite a bit because I believe he was the dude who sat in the back of the plane and shot the gun. And so those are the ones that had the primary focus. The husband and wife, probably the most out of them all, and a little bit about all the others. Definitely not as deep for all the others. And it wasn't even really super deep even for the husband and wife, because like I said, they just could not. It wasn't like a Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor had it was a character drama that focused very exclusively on the three main characters, Kate Beckinsale and Ben Affleck's and Josh Hartnett's characters. And the war story aspect of it was more like this thing's happening in the background. But Pearl Harbor was more about the love triangle between those three characters. And that's probably, I don't know if that's why Pearl Harbor was not very well received in general. I mean, I liked it when I saw it, even bought like the collector's edition box and everything with the map and the special DVD or whatever. But, looking back on it, it's really not that great of a film. It's okay. It's not awful. But there are flaws, and to me, it's because it becomes too much of a silly love triangle thing. It reminds me a bit of the silliness in Titanic. I absolutely hate Titanic, and I hate Avatar. It's amazing to me that James Cameron can make two of my favorite movies in all of movie history, and then he can also make two movies that I absolutely just hate the most out of them all. And it's probably because they were so high ranked in sales, and I kept hoping they would be defeated, and they were finally defeated this year. Yay. Anyway, huge tangent. Sorry. What was I talking about? Oh, the difference between the focus on the characters in Pearl Harbor and the focus on the characters in Midway. So it did feel kind of like you were watching a documentary without the narration, and with some more, like with people acting out the stuff that happened in the history of what they're talking about here, and more talking interaction with the people in the story, because there is no narrator telling you the story. That is pretty much what it felt like. And so consequently, it does sort of make you feel a little removed from the characters on a personal level. There's certainly, like this guy, there's certainly, ones you feel a little bit more connected to, and that's just because they focused on them more. The relationship with his wife, and his concerns about everything, and the personal concerns that some of the others had. Some of the others, they really didn't get too much at all into the personal aspects of their lives. It was mostly about the role that they played, like Doolittle, the role that he played in the war, and it didn't really focus at all on anything with regard to his family or anything outside of the war. There were several characters. Most of the characters, that's probably what they did. So, yeah, that is pretty much what they did with most of the characters. With regard to the representation of the Japanese side of this equation, I felt like the movie handled it very respectfully. Like it didn't make the Japanese out to be hideous bad guys. Well, if you look back through their history in World War II, some of the things they did were very, 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 very bad. Awful. But that wasn't what this story was about. This story was about the people involved in Midway, what led up to it, and the Battle of. And at the end of the film, they dedicated it to the bravery and the selflessness or sacrifice of the brave people on both sides. And that was pretty true. I mean, especially during the part where the Japanese were pretty much defeated after the battle and the ships were sinking and the captain went down with his ship, and one of his crew members, one of the guys ranked below him, he went down with him. He didn't want to leave the captain's side, so that takes a brave person to do something like that. I can't even comprehend that level of personal sacrifice to do what you think is the right thing as far as that goes. Personal sacrifice, your actual, really for real sacrifice, not like a symbolic sacrifice, an actual sacrifice of your life. So, in that regard, I see what they're talking about when they mentioned the bravery and selflessness on both sides. I'm paraphrasing, but that was the gist of it. Anyway, so that's kind of all I can think of to mention with regard to this movie. That is what it felt like to me, like kind of like a documentary, except without narration and more actor acting. So it was well done. If a little dry, I guess I would say kind of dry, but that's not a huge negative to me. It's just kind of like letting you know that you're not going to get super deeply involved with the characters. You're just going to be shown this sequence of events. So I'm thinking that's probably why the critics gave it the low ratings that they did. But I think it was adequate. I think it did a decent job. I wouldn't go as high as audience scores of mid-80s, like I already said, but I can't go as low as the 40s because I feel like it was much better than something like that. And certainly not like my favorite war movie ever. I don't even know if I have a favorite war movie, but I think it's worth a watch, especially if you're someone who likes history of World War II specifically, history of the Pacific battles. I think that you'll probably find this pretty good. Maybe you'll be, if you know the history really, really good. I mean, I don't know how much of this was maybe dramatized. I have a feeling it was fairly historically accurate, and but I'm not a history buff as far as this particular thing goes, or just in general. I'm not a huge history buff. I know superficial stuff about different things in history. Maybe something's a little bit, deeper than others, but I think that if I would go and do some research on fact versus fiction, I have a feeling that I would find that this movie is fairly accurate, does a good job of showing you what happened, and not too much embellishment. That's what I guess. I might be wrong, but I have a feeling that I'm not. And if there's some history buff out there that knows a whole lot more than I do about this, let me know if I'm wrong. Let me know if the movie failed in with regard to that, and we'll talk about it, I guess. Maybe I'll learn something I hadn't learned before, hadn't known before. So, okay, well, I'm going to wrap this one up for now. I think I've talked sufficiently about it, much longer than I really was anticipating I would. And I think that's it for now, you guys. We'll talk later. Bye.